Morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 African Edutech Conference, Panel 2. I'm excited to be here. My name is Mo Adefesola-Teju, and I work at the Education Partnership Center. The conversation that we are holding during this panel focuses on adaptive learning and the future of education. And I have three exciting and very experienced speakers who are joining the conversation today. The first of our speakers is not here yet, but will be joining us shortly, as I'm made to understand. She is Mrs. Folashade Adefisayo, the Honorable Commissioner for Education in Lagos State. Our second speaker is Mr. Anthony Ilobinso, who is the school administrator of Corona Day Secondary School, Lekki. And our third, but certainly not the least of all our panelists, is Mr. Charles Dungo, who is the General Manager of Business and Partnerships at edufirst.ng, and therefore one of our key hosts for today. I'm excited about this topic. The reason I'm excited because I think 2020 has brought into culmination, is really the culmination of a lot of agitation of educators in Nigeria, which is the need for us to begin to think again about how education is delivered, the need for us to rethink how teaching is done, and the need for us to think about how learning systems are also implemented. I'm particularly excited because I strongly believe that adaptive learning has a huge place in the future of education and a huge role to play in helping us move our children into that inevitable future, which I believe the year 2020 has precipitated for people all around the world. So I hope you will stay with us for the next half an hour or so whilst we dig into some of the meatier matters, pertaining to adaptive learning and the future of education. The first person I'd like to start with, the first speaker that I'd like to start with is Anthony. Now, Anthony, you are the administrator of Corona Day School in Lekki, which is, as I refer to it, the baby of the Corona schools, because it's, I think, the most recently opened one. And your work has been very deep in terms of helping to move the school ahead when it comes to technology adoption. Now, I know that you joined as a biology teacher, but at the same time, you've also been the technology integration specialist for the school. And so you have really taken the lead when it comes to managing the school's electric curriculum database and e-learning platform, which means that you engage quite a lot with how it is that children learn. And I think one of the first questions I'd like to pose to you is, what is adaptive learning? I'm not going to take for granted that everyone on this call here today understands what we mean by adaptive learning. How do you explain that? And how do you explain that within the context of a child-centered curriculum or a child-centered education? Anthony?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Oteja. Adaptive learning. Adaptive learning is an innovative method or approach to teaching and learning, where you have, tools, technologies, and instruments that have the ability to adapt the instruction or adapt the learning experience or tailor it, so to say, to meet with the specific needs and interests of learners. I'll throw some light into what adaptive learning is by painting a little picture of what we have, what the current situation is in the classroom. The reality of today's class, that is the traditional class, is that there is a certain complexity in terms of the makeup and the composition of learners. You have learners who are very diverse, who are very distinct in the way they learn, in their experiences, their prior knowledge, their strengths, their weaknesses, their interests. So they're very, very different. And sometimes you have about 20, 30, 40, and even in some schools, you have about 70, 80, 100 students in one class. Now, when you juxtapose this reality with the situation you have again in most conventional or traditional classrooms, where the approach to teaching and learning is mostly broad-based, teacher-centered, traditional. That is, the teacher just creates a uniform resource. It could be a PowerPoint or something, projects to the students, and then there is an expectation that everybody in that class would learn the same way and engage with the material at the same pace and at the same time. When you juxtapose these realities, you begin to understand the reason for the kind of sort of disengagement and the discontentment you find with some learners who are feeling that learning has become a pretty much arduous task. It has become a burden for them, and they're not really motivated to learn again. And so that's exactly where adaptive learning comes in. The fact that you can tailor the experience, you can tailor the learning experience to meet the needs, the specific needs and interests of the learners. You know, it's for me, adaptive learning is a very important vehicle and tool for achieving the kind of student-centeredness or learner-centric approach to learning that we want to see in today's world. The reality is that we're beginning to realize that we need to depart from the traditional ways of teaching, where the teacher is the focus, the sole focus of the whole process. And we're beginning to see that shift where students become more at the center of learning and the teacher just plays the role of a facilitator. So student-centered methods are proven to have proven over time to be more effective in improving students' gains, student achievement, their enhanced performance. And adaptive learning allows for student-centered learning in the sense that you're tailoring the experience to meet with the needs, specific needs of the learner. That means the learner actually gets to take charge of the learning. The learner understands that this thing is tailored for me, and so takes responsibility, takes charge of the learning process. And what you see with that is that, you know, because it revolves around the learner becomes more engaged and begins to achieve more. So I think adaptive learning for me is very promising in helping us reshape and rethink the way we carry out education, especially within contexts like ours.
That, Anthony, I think that for me, it's really important how you shed light on the reality that adaptive learning is in the interest of the child, is in the best interest of the child. And everyone else within that education production function, if I can refer to it as that, really needs to be focusing on what is in the best interest of the child. And so I know that at this point in time, and not least of all because of the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of schools are in the position where they're needing to leapfrog very, very quickly into the technology age, and where they're beginning to rethink what it means to provide differentiated learning, differentiated learning opportunities to their students. Many schools have had to provide remote access. There have been hilarious stories of children locking out their teachers and going on to watch movies, whilst the teacher is struggling to find out what exactly happened to me, during this class. But the reality is that this is a situation that many schools find themselves in, which is wondering, how do we begin to create those sorts of meaningful learning opportunities for children, leveraging technology? And so my next question to you, again, Anthony, is what sort of advice do you want to give to schools who are thinking very deeply about how individualization and personalization has come to stay, and are thinking, how do we integrate this within our current educational systems? Because I can imagine that some of the participants at this conference are actually school owners and perhaps investors in education.
Thank you very much. I think many schools have had to hit a hard reset with the situation with the pandemic. We saw that so many schools were not learning. Students were kept at home without having any contact with the teachers. And so it's more like we're being compelled to now, take up technology, because we have seen that even when this thing was happening, many schools, many learners were still learning during that time. I think for a school to, take that step, I consider the most important or critical element of making that transition to becoming a school where technology is at the heart and at the core of enhancing the learning process, I think, is to have a clear vision and a clear understanding of what you want to achieve with technology. What you see most times, there are certain proprietors or school owners, is that they're a bit too, they are too anxious, and they don't really take the time to really think through and ask themselves exactly what they want to achieve with technology. And so they spend, a lot of resources, they invest money, and they buy all these wonderful devices and invest in software. But then you see that, those things are redundant. The teachers are not using them, the students are not using them, and then it becomes like they've wasted money. So you need to have a very clear understanding, a very clear vision of what you want to do with technology. And that for me is the first step, the most critical step. Now, when you know what you want to do with technology, the next step would be to sort of roll out a roadmap or a plan to actualize that vision. And that would involve sort of maybe chunking it into short, medium, and long-term goals. So ask yourself exactly what you want to purchase or what you want to do in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And then ask yourself, do you want to do a phased installation of infrastructure and all that? And when you have a clear plan, then you need to start thinking about implementation. So how do you implement that plan? And one of the very critical elements of that process of implementation, would be the teachers. Because let's face it, if you invest money and the teachers don't have a buy-in, they don't understand why technology should be there in the first place, where teachers still feel that they should utilize or deploy their, tested and trusted methods that have worked for them for donkey years, and you're asking them to just quickly shift and pivot to technology. So you need to get them to understand why technology is important. And there has to be a lot of orientation, reorientation, reskilling, upskilling of staff to get them to embrace technology, because they are the ones that ultimately will use these tools and these devices and sort of use it to enhance the experience for the learners. And of course, so professional development opportunities, you have to provide that for them. And when you have the teacher buy-in, then you also have to train your students, because your students also have to, buy into it too. One thing that many schools face is that they don't have funds to sort of, procure large amounts of devices, say laptops or tablets or all that. And one thing they can explore, at least for a start, is to do what we call a BYOD program, a bring your own device program, where the students get to bring their own devices, which meets with the configurations of the school. And so those devices are now used to enhance the learning process. One last thing I would also recommend for schools is that they need to be very intentional about that process. And that means you need to have someone in place or in charge who will drive the process. What we're seeing, the trends we're seeing in schools now, we're seeing people who have this role called technology integration specialists. They are teachers who are very efficient and proficient users of technology. And so those teachers are saddled with that responsibility of training and guiding teachers and students to use the technology tools in that school to enhance the experience, and also recommend newer technologies that can enhance the experience. So it's something that can look daunting when you try to bite and chew as so many things at one go, but you just have to chunk it into bits and take it one step at a time.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important that you make clear that thinking about technology and moving into new ways of deploying technology in school is a planned process. It's one that has to be thought about systematically, and it's one that has to be thought about deliberately as well. And what you say about teachers being considered as full participants in that process is one that I'm going to come back to you on. But thank you for those comments. I'm going to move now to Charles Dungo, and welcome. So I know that EduFirst has led the charge when it comes to models of adaptive learning that are currently working in Nigeria. And you've done a fair bit of work in the sense that you are helping schools understand how adaptive learning works. You're working with governments across the country as well. And what I want you to share with us in the first instance is what models are actually working when it comes to adaptive learning, and what models are working within the context of a Nigeria where we have issues around data, issues around accessibility of data because of the cost, accessibility to devices. I think Anthony has talked a little bit about that as well. And also within the context of a society that is largely unequal, where children cannot access even basic education because they're poor, or because they have a disability, or because they're female. How does adaptive learning work within this kind of complex system?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So briefly, looking at in the context of what Edufairs does basically as a business and the role we play within the education space. With the pandemic, we did something I would class like a survey, or we did like a research to see how best to bring in adaptive learning for students that are, I would use the term low income earners, and for students within unity schools, state and federal owned schools, as well as students within communities that are remote communities. So the communities where sufficient education was not going to be applicable to them in this time and in that time and season, which is the COVID time. And for some reason, it became exciting to us when we had settled down to create content. So what we did was we worked with the Nigerian Education Research Development Council, got all the curriculum contents that's approved by the Research Council, and we developed contents that were in our minds were meant to speak to adaptive learning for students within these communities. We thought to ourselves to say, how best do we reach out to those students within distance community and students that were out of school? So what we did in that light was basically to work around content in an audio format, and we engaged adaptive learning from what the children in that period were more conversant with, which was the social media platform. So we were having conversations around Mondays to Fridays for within the two, which were around the times we knew the students were going to be on that platform, engaging with also social activities. So what we tried to do was to engage them on the WhatsApp platform, the Telegram platform, and we got them learning on a day-to-day basis. Now, this is what it was for us. The joy of this for us was the ability for students to find it so interesting that consistently students within those remote communities, students within the low-income brackets were able to attend on a day-to-day basis. They exchanged ideas, they were able to ask questions within themselves, engage with the teachers via the platform and the app we were using. Another thing we tried to look through was to ensure that the app on a day-to-day basis was not consuming as much as in excess of a maximum of 100 megabytes per day. So it was an affordable mode of learning for them. And students were having an average of about 10,000 students signing on a day-to-day basis. And we're having teachers also having to teach them remotely. This for us brought to mind the mindsets of these children in regards to engaging with such platforms as WhatsApp and Telegram. So it became necessitated for us to say, do we develop a model that works where students can consistently bracket of the low-income bracket and those from remote communities, how they could actually still engage educationally and be able to compete globally with the private schools in that period. And for us, we saw it was awesome. We saw students were taking us, coming back with the reports for their assignments. Most of them actually used the platform to engage with themselves for their forthcoming WAEC examinations, because they were able to use the platform to have conversations with teachers. So for us, for me as a person, I see accessibility of data to be an issue, but an issue that would not stop a child from learning. If the right tools are put out there for them to learn within that space, they would adapt to the learning culture and progress with it. Fair enough for the Nigerian system, as much as it's not so affordable, a lot of telcos have been able to subsidize the rates at which this data would cost. But if students are not properly engaged and students are not properly put in the place where you can have a viable consumption on those data on things that would matter, you would find them in those other social media platforms. So it was an interesting part of and we believe over the period, it's something that should be engaged on the public-private partnership for the public sector to work with edutech companies to see how best they can have this go through around school. Because with the COVID, we all understand that there's become a call for what our class online schooling across all schools, not just putting so progressing in that form and leaving the public schools or the unity schools staggering behind. So it's something that we need to the Nigerian educational system.
Thank you. I think that's a very positive contribution, and it really does give a lot of hope that even children that are disadvantaged socioeconomically can also take advantage of adaptive learning. And it's good to know that their teachers are involved in this process, as well. And I think that the thing that you say about online learning is also commendable, especially when one realizes that, remote instruction need not be fully online. And so data costs can be reduced when children don't actually have to be online real time all the time. So I think that's very helpful. One more question there, because there is a demographic that for a lot of education planners might come across as being a difficult one to plan for, but are extremely important when we think about technology and the future of education. And these that have different types of special needs. Their physical needs, cognitive disabilities, reading disabilities or delays, they also have the right to access high quality education, and to access high quality education that is provided through technological approaches. What are your comments regarding where technology comes in to address some of the severe issues that we have with these children who are being left behind every single day?
Thank you. So for me, I believe the time has come where there needs to be some level of intervention from the public sector as well as private participants and private stakeholders in the educational space. Because for me, there needs to be, the time has come for us to close the gap between what students from privileged communities or privileged homes are able to learn over a period and what students from low-income brackets or students with some level of disability are able to access. It's because there's an opportunity for a proper relationship between the government and telcos to see how best they can make this available for adaptation within the communities. There's also a need for us to see how best we can have community-based learning across locations that will be technology savvy for students within to come together in those communities and learn technologically. So we could have, for instance, where you have community-based solar panel classrooms that are very direct to those remote communities or are available for students with special abilities that can afford the regular educational patterns. And I think that would be a way for the government to direct its intervention in education going forward to bridge that gap for the public and private, because obviously there's some level of high costs for students within that bracket, students with special abilities within that bracket to be able to access quality learning. It's become a little bit expensive as regards Nigeria. But I believe if there are proper interventions from the government, it should be able to bridge that gap, working directly with the private sectors to model out what would work and what will reach directly to those students, because it has to be adaptive, because I'm really focused around the child as opposed just developing content that would not reach, that would not be
great.
Adapted.
Thank you so much. Also, we're also still on the subject of teaching and learning. Anthony, I'd like to come back to you. So we know that in Nigeria we have severe challenges in some contexts around teacher capability and teacher competence. So in instances where we find that teacher competence levels are weak, especially in a lot of the public schools around the country, and there's talk around, streaming live classes of some of the most effective teachers so that thousands and thousands of learners are able to benefit from an excellent teacher. There is a sense in which teachers are beginning to be filled with some trepidation around the future of their jobs. Then bring in differentiation on steroids, i.e. adaptive learning, and we have a perfect storm where many teachers are genuinely beginning to feel that they are being replaced by technology. And we know that this really does not augur well, for teaching and learning operations within the context of the classroom. What are your comments around adaptive learning, the future of education, and indeed the future of teaching? What would you say to teachers?
Okay, so I'd say that the reality of today's world is that we're coming to a point where people are beginning to question the relevance of schools, and even not just teachers now, but even schools, because you find out that many resources that students can use to learn are available for purchase from independent units that are not schools. And so, like you said, teachers are beginning to question their role and their future in that whole situation where they feel like schools are going to, they're going to have less schools, and teachers will become less relevant, and then probably have artificial intelligence and all that replace teachers and all that. The truth is that I don't think teachers can be replaced. But what I would say is that teachers who do not key into the times, and teachers who do not take up that, who do not find or see the need to upskill and to rescale and improve themselves and even key into the times, like I said, teachers who don't see that will be replaced, because the reality is we're beginning to see that, like I said, knowledge and information is available everywhere. It's proliferated, and of course the role of the teacher as a facilitator cannot be, you cannot take that out. You can't say that, okay, because we have all these things readily available, we need to take off teachers. No, teachers are still very important, but it will be only teachers who can leverage the tools, the existing tools, who can key into the times and who can function and not get left behind. Those are the teachers that will remain relevant in this time and even in the future. So what I would say is teachers need to take it upon themselves. It's behooving on the teacher to improve themselves. The reality is that there are different avenues and methods or ways of really improving yourself. You don't need to wait for your employer to send you out for a training or something. You can do something on your own to improve yourself. I have examples of teachers who have used a very simple tool like YouTube channels to really, themselves, evaluate themselves, upskill, learn new skills, whether using technology or in their practice as teachers or in classroom management or different facets or areas of their pedagogical practice. Teachers have used things as simple as YouTube to improve themselves. So again, I think it's all about the mindset. I'll take it back to the mindset. If teachers begin to think that things are going to stay the way they are and we're going to remain, think the way learning has been in the past 20, 30 years, we're still going to have that continue, they're going to get left behind, because the reality is that things are changing, and it will only take people who have that adaptive growth mindset to embrace the changes that we see today. People who can fully embrace those things are the ones who will remain relevant and who will function in today and tomorrow's world. So that's what I'd say about the future of teaching and schools. I think you're muted.
Pardon me. I love what you say about teachers and the adaptive growth mindset, and Nigeria and indeed the world is ready for teachers who are able to demonstrate this sort of mindset. But just coming again to you, Charles, as we round off this session, the reality is that teachers don't work in isolation. Most of the teachers in Nigeria today are actually public school employees and therefore government employees. And so there is a huge role, that the government continues to play. As Datola from the previous session was saying, that Lagos State, for example, doesn't think of teachers just as public school teachers, but they think of all schools, public and private, as theirs. So there is a huge role for government to play. And if you were sat right now with the National Commission for Colleges of Education and asked to advise on how we can help teachers adopt this adaptive growth mindset that Anthony is referring to, en masse, at scale, across the country, in public and private schools, low-fee schools and high-end schools, what would you say to the National Commission for Colleges of Education? And indeed, using them as a proxy for all the duty bearers when it comes to education policy making in Nigeria.
Thank you. Also, for me, just taking off from a little bit from the previous speaker, I would like to say this. Education is really not about the learning or just about the learning. There's a in that. I think that part of the school environment offer. Find out that ideally when you come out of school, you're with a certificate that speaks to being successful in learning and character. Character being a very paramount part of coming out of the school environment. If I had to speak to the regulatory authorities, I would say to them, most of what you find around, most of the teachers you find around in this time are really not in this current generation of minds in terms of the mindsets. You find out the level at which technology has, in the last 5 to 10 years, has really taken over from them. So what you find out around these teachers is there's a scare. There's a scare because people, these teachers do not want to not be able to deliver on a day-to-day basis for using these technology devices just for the simple PowerPoints, having to type on a computer and work on a laptop. They don't even have the skill. So there's that scare. So if I had to regulatory bodies, I would be pleading with them for them to look at opportunities for training, learnings, and relearnings for these teachers. Most of these teachers have been able to learn in this period because for us as an Edutech company, we've been able to even have training for these teachers. And one thing that was prominent across all the locations we had these trainings was we observed that the first two friction, because these teachers are kind of struggling with even how to power the computer. And you find out that most of the teachers within these, I would say, unity schools or low-income schools are not offered such opportunity as private school owners in terms of trainings. So you find out that at some point, the students that are aligning with adaptive learning are even able to be knowledge-based a little bit above some of these teachers, because these teachers have not been up quick and as fast as some of the students. So there's a need for immediate around trainings as opposed to expecting them to work the same way it's always been. It's also glad to know that some of these public schools teachers have adopted some active learning techniques, and you find out in some of the schools you're not seeing the regular white and the regular blackboards where they're speaking, and you see some of them are even able to projector screen via the trainings we've offered them over the period to even have lessons. They're even able to do some mark assignments, take questions, take reviews from students via emails and all of that. So they need the time is now for that force to be energized within the public space, where they're able to even teach the basic things, setting up an email for teachers, getting teachers to adapt to learning via technology as opposed to day-to-day form, mode of learning. So it's basically about them being trained and being empowered to be able to take it to the next level. Over the period, what we did as a system, we had what we call like a digital teachers challenge, because we were basically around, the business is basically around 80 schools at present, unity schools, that's federal government-based schools. What to do with them was engage them in some level of competition amongst themselves. And you would find out we wanted the technology component of what we've been teaching and training over the period to basically show forth itself. So we had about 280 teachers sign up, and about 196 of them signed up, submitted using PowerPoints. So it was quite creative for most of these teachers, where they were able to use diagrams in place of words to identify shapes. They were able to use audios and combine the audios with visuals for students to learn. We were good enough to provide them the winner political zone, 18 of them. We provided them with laptops, these EduPad laptops customized for teaching and for learning for students and teachers. So with some of these support systems they really need for them to emerge. I don't want to believe the teachers in those public institutions or public schools are not willing or able to learn. I think they are the
Thank you so much for that. Definitely a lot of investment is needed
due
by
to
the
level
government
of investment by
in
the
order
state government.
to make sure that we are smack
scaled
in the 21st century and are taking advantage of the opportunities that technology presents to us. I'm going to move in now into some of the questions that have come from our participants. There are a number of questions here that I think are quite interesting. I'll start with you, Anthony. There's a question about the notion of discipline and physical interaction, and this being a critical part of the learning experience. And how do we address this gap, that may be created by adaptive learning? So it's a question that basically suggests that we might be taking, away the psychomotor and perhaps, the affective components, of learning when we prioritize adaptive learning. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we can adaptive learning for me. Of course, it's mostly done on devices, yes, but that doesn't mean that you take out completely all the other aspects of a child's life, all those other aspects that help for the growth of a well-rounded, child. So I still think you can still have those physical interactions and also, get the child to develop holistically. What I would say for adaptive learning is that for students to be able to embark on or to carry out adaptive learning effectively, I think schools must become more intentional about training students to become self-directed and self-motivated. Because the truth of the matter is that when you have adaptive learning tools, the way many of them that we see today require the student to learn at his own pace and at his own time. And so schools need to take it up as a challenge to start training the students to become people who are self-directed, people who are self-motivated. And you can do that by just giving students little responsibilities where they are held accountable for their learning. For example, one way to do that would be to ask the students to do what is called, to have a journal. So they journal every day and write down the activities. They get to reflect on those activities at the end of the week or at certain intervals. You can get the students to carry out what I call student-led conferences. What you see with most parent-teacher conferences is that the child just sits down, and then the parent and the teacher are discussing about the progress of the child. The child just sits and looks and is like an onlooker, a passive receptor. Mm-hmm. But when you start embarking on student-led conferences where the child is the one that takes charge and discusses his performance and talks about his strengths, his weaknesses, where he thinks he can improve and where he thinks he did not do very well. When you begin to build that culture of reflection, self-introspection, then you can begin to develop the kind of self-directed students and the kind of discipline required for students to embark effectively and successfully with adaptive learning strategies.
Thank you so much for that, Anthony. And one question for you, Charles, is what digital learning resources are available for nursery, primary, and secondary students? I think this person is asking, where can they find a curated list of resources that are useful for teaching and learning across the grade levels?
Okay, so for me, I know there are a few partners we've worked with over the years that basically speak to nursery and primary. They could check up on a business called Niger-Kids. Niger-Kids offers basically to children within the nursery primary space, and we're in partnership with them on our EduPad laptops, because sometimes we need to engage those laptops to be sourced, to be purchased by owners of nursery and primary school. We've also got the other one we call Nigerian-British. Nigerian-British is basically also another platform where they could actually access learning for the nursery and primary school. What is basically been done within those two platforms, it's the platform
Excellent, thank you so much. I know there's another question here around confronting the challenge of data and tablets, but you had addressed that earlier, hadn't you? And I think that one of the strong points that you had made was this call for public and private sector partnerships. So thank you for that. I think it's been an exciting session, and I want to say thank you to both our speakers, Mr. Charles Dungo and Mr. Anthony Ilobinso. I'm sorry that the Commissioner for Education was unable to participate in the meeting today, but I know that if she was able to, she would definitely have been here. My key takeaways: adaptive learning is here to stay, and there's no point fighting it. We need to think very deeply about how we can embed systemically opportunities for children to learn at their own pace and be supported through that process. It is doable even for children that come from lower socioeconomic classifications or socioeconomic groups, as well as for children who are traditionally excluded on the basis of their gender or on the basis of their disabilities. It is very important that we think about public and private partnerships to provide access to low-cost data opportunities, to cheap devices, and therefore expand access so that technology really does become a democratizer, if I can put it that way, of access, to quality education. You had also talked about, Charles, the need for communities to be involved in the provision of education so that children who are normally not reached easily will be reached through the participation of community actors. And I think, again, a very important point that Anthony made, being able to exercise their own agency and also, developing an adaptive growth mindset is absolutely critical for the times that we live in, and those are the sorts of teachers that will ultimately become successful in the future. We also talked about the integration of the physical, the socio-emotional, and the cognitive dimensions of learning, and how this is possible even within an adaptive learning framework. And I love what you also say, Anthony, about student-led conferences and just helping children and learners, younger learners particularly, to become self-reflective, to reflect on how they are learning and indeed to take charge of their own learning journeys. I think this is the kind of world that we want for Nigeria. This is the sort of future that we're looking for, where learners have the ability to think critically, to take charge of their own learning, to curate their own learning, and for teachers that are fully competent and able to support this process as facilitators in many instances. On that note, I want to say a huge thank you to the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce and also to EduFirst for the opportunity to be here. And I do believe the next session will be starting presently. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to our wonderful audience as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very interesting session. Tomo for coordinating that for us. I would also like to say a huge Charles Dungo, as well as Mr. Anthony, for their contributions. I think all day we've been on an educational journey, from our first session, the formulation and implementation of Africa's educational policies, where are you, to this session, learning and the future of education. We're not yet done. We have one more session for you, and we would like you to please wait behind. Don't go anywhere. You can step out a bit for maybe tea or coffee, get your water, but please sit back down for the next session. Before I would like to especially appreciate our partners, EduFirst, for giving us the opportunity to have 80 federal unity colleges around the country having the school media viewing experience currently ongoing as we speak. If you want to take a look at some of the pictures, please feel free to visit our social media handles. I'd like to appreciate the teachers and the students of FGC Zuri, FGGC Bauchi, FCT Ahoka, FGGC Jalingo, KC Main Campus, FGC Ibilo, FGGC Abaji, FCG Jos, and loads more. We also have FGC Kefi also currently viewing this conference as we speak. If I was unable to take your name or mention your name, we send you our love and appreciation from Lagos. Thank you for getting this to one location to learn from us today and from the diverse speakers that we have currently taking us through the educational journey of our topic, jobs, education, and technology, the new normal. So before going to our next session, please, like I mentioned earlier in the morning too as well, feel free to at the networking section, the expo, so you can at least get the full experience of this conference. So we'll take a short break, videos, and we'll be back with our last session. Thank you very much.